Welcome once again to this sixth episode. Friends, we have been discussing the Sermon on the Mount from part 1. Little by little, we have been unfolding shade after shade about the Sermon on the Mount. We have been seeing Jesus very closely. Jesus was one man who said, I'm here to fulfill the law, not to destroy, not to abandon, not to abolish, but to fulfill. At the same time, Jesus wanted to fulfill by asking you and me to practice whatever has been said, put into action whatever we will listen. And then he says, you have heard it in the past, but I tell you now, listen to me. This is how you should understand. So Jesus was becoming very, very important. Jesus is now picking up a few important incidences in life which causes the derailment of the human community, the harmony of the human community. We are not able to live together. We are into fragments. This harmony is getting derailed. And Jesus is now trying to figure out why all these are happening. Remember, the time that Jesus was living was of a great oppressive time. The Greco-Roman world was an oppressive world. Every other day, they would soldiers march in for some reason or the other, harass. For no reason, you can be convicted. You can be crucified. It's told that about 3,000 people at one time, they were crucified along the streets, along the road. 3,000 in number, one after the other. It all happened in Jesus' time. And there were also a religious community which was more oppressive, who were working hand in glove with those time governors, those time administrators, politicians. And they were living in an oppressive world. Here, this hatred and revenge that was there pumped up in every individual, and they were now looking for opportunities to settle scores. They had different units developed to settle this issue. They wanted to take revenge. Iscariots, Judas Iscariot, dagger men they call. They were Essenes, or they were Sicari group they were called to. And they were zealots. Lot of aggressive people. It was told of two great leaders, Bar Kokhaba they say. They were ruling for 150 years. They were promising Jewish freedom. But they were not real free people. They were oppressed. In that hatred, in that time of difficulty, Jesus now understands and he now expresses to people at the top of the mountain. He picks up and says, he sees the community getting divided on one reason, it is of murder. People murdering one another. And then people come to this stage because of illicit relationships. Adultery. Any man can go with any woman for anything. That's sort of a loose living community life. Day in, day out, there was divorce. Families getting separated. It was so easy. As the Islamic community today pronounced talaq, it was so with the Jewish community can write up. Simply write and finish off. Divorce was rampant. And people were never true. They promise to one and they don't keep up the promise. They break promises. Nobody is serious of the other. Nobody treats the other to be very cautious. No courtesy is now extended. And everybody is now taking advantage of the other. Being smart, as we call it today. taking revenge, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, because the word of the law was giving sanction to this. It's okay to do that way. If somebody chops your limb or your hand, it's okay for you to chop off his hand. There's nothing wrong. Eye for an eye. And then had multiple of enemies. Jewish people had multiple enemies. That community has been always a target. We remember Hitler in Germany, the Nazis, the Holocaust, the Jewish massacre, that hate, and these people have this enmity in them installed, goes on and on. And Jesus is now picking up one after the other and is giving a response. Friends, he now decides. Verse 21 and 22 of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5. 21, 22 refers only to murder. He says, this rage, you have heard it in the past. It's okay for you to murder. I tell you now, even if you call somebody a fool, or if you look down upon somebody, harass somebody, if you humiliate somebody, and that would be equal to murder. Murdering of somebody's conscience, murdering of somebody's identity. And Jesus' way of explaining it, now I tell you, but I tell unto you, means that you go forward a little. Verses 27 and 28 talks about adultery. It's okay for people to go on adultery unless you're caught. Until you're caught. You can be with adultery, that's nothing wrong. If you're caught, you're stoned. And Jesus says, it's not the question of getting caught, but the very idea, the very sight, the very notion, very intention, that can amount to adultery. It's not the outward expression, but the inward thought, the deep thought, thinking, imagination, that can amount to adultery. And Jesus' way of saying it is now, you have heard it to be in the past, but I tell you now. Which means Jesus is now tightening up screws. His bars are raised. It's not easy. Again, coming to divorce, verses 31 to 32. He says, Moses gave us the permission to write off. And he says, if you're doing that, you're causing somebody to go for adultery, or you're causing somebody to be an adulterer. You become the reason behind. And that day, nobody was looking at the causes. I mean, they see the cause, perhaps they were not looking at the effects. Effects of it, nobody was serious about it. But Jesus now takes the effects to be more important. You are the cause for it. He says, mind you, divorce is not easy. But for your unrepentant hard heart, Moses would not have written this. In other words, to say, this has come as the last resort, and now you're taking it for granted. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That comes in the spirit of revenge. And Jesus in verse 38-39 says, it's for God to take revenge. For anybody to be avenged, it's God. It's not for you. If you keep on doing that, today we hear say, for an eye will make the whole world blind. And if we go by that law, that was olden law. Jesus says, no, if somebody taxes you, asks you to walk 1 kilometer for you, and you better be prepared to walk the second mile or the second kilometer. And this is what Jesus is talking to us and say, but I tell you. When he says, but I tell you, but I say unto you, means that you walk a little further. Your spirituality needs to be a little better and more. And finally, it's okay for you to hate your enemies. Now, whole of the Old Testament, all of the Psalms, You sing, say, God, here are my enemies, avenge my enemies, kill them. You teach them lessons and so on. It's okay to hate your enemies and love your neighbors. And Jesus is reversing. He says, no, 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 no. You love your enemies. It's not only your neighbors. Treat your enemies to be as your lovers. And these are all seen as utopia. People say this is not possible. The Isaiah vision where the lion and the sheep going together, that cannot happen. These are utopian, they say. But friends, these are the starting point. Unless and until we have a starting point, we will not reach any further. At the same time, it's easy for us to push to extremes and say, this is what Jesus said. And Jesus is now saying, this is the ultimate. Have a beginning. Start your beginning. Start your life. Friends, when I say Jesus is now teaching us new spirituality, this is what it all means. This is what it all means about. Jesus is saying, unless and until your spirituality supersedes the spirituality of the Pharisees and the scribes, you shall not enter the kingdom of God. This invitation is open for us, but the call is very, very costly. And this is the bar, this is the benchmark that Jesus is setting for you and me. We need to follow. Come, let's follow. Attempt to follow. Let us begin to follow. May God bless you. Thank you.